This is Jeremy. Welcome to Eighthworld. Good day, everybody. This is around noontime on March 29th, 2020. This is the 5th regular episode of Eighthworld Podcast. Today I want to talk a bit about canonicity and continuity in Star Wars. This has been a popular topic among Star Wars YouTubers recently, the ones that I listen to, and a lot of it stems from, now that we're through the sequel trilogy of films, we can look back on things with a more complete eye. So a little background for the current conflict within the Star Wars fandom, which I do not wish to pick a fight with any aspect of the Star Wars fandom. All I'm trying to do is lay out some information and state a couple of opinions. But in 2014, Disney purchased Star Wars from George Lucas for $4 billion, and it immediately hit the reset button on the entire Star Wars line. And at that point, only the 6 live-action films and the CG Clone Wars and Rebels TV series were considered canonical. All previously existing books and comics set in the Star Wars universe were invalidated, and new books of varying quality were immediately commissioned, and Star Wars Comics line was taken away from Dark Horse and given to Marvel, which also had its own Star Wars Comics line back in the 80s, which was also retconned for the most part out of existence earlier, which is a trend in Star Wars Expanded Universe that we will get back to in a moment. So these new books and comic series are granting mixed results across the board, much like their predecessors in the Expanded Universe did. And as I said, this is not the first reset on the Star Wars Expanded Universe continuity, but it is the largest. In fact, a previous retcon of the Clone Wars had occurred only 6 years earlier, invalidating the series of Clone Wars animated shorts by Genndy Tartakovsky of Samurai Jack, Dexter's Laboratory, and Powerpuff Girls fame. Now, Disney's reset fully invalidated everything outside of the films and TV shows I mentioned earlier that came before it, but particularly the Expanded Universe established in 1991 with Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, which introduced the Star Wars fandom to Grand Admiral Thrawn and other characters, and the Dark Horse Dark Empire comic series, which first introduced the world to a resurrected Emperor Palpatine as the villain. From 1991 to 2013, dozens and dozens of Star Wars novels and comic series were released, building an expansion of the Star Wars universe that kept it alive for new generations. The issue that is still straining the edges of the Star Wars fandom, I think, is this conflict between fans of different generations who, some grew up with all of these books and comics being readily available that helped keep Star Wars alive in their minds. And there's certainly a case to be made that Star Wars might not exist as it does today. The prequel films might never have been made if not for the expanded universe that began with Heir to the Empire and Dark Empire. If it were not for the renewed interest that came to the line with those books and comics, it's arguable that Star Wars might have simply faded away over time, and it would not be nearly as big as it is now. Now, like I said, I'm not looking to pick a fight with anyone who's really defensive of Disney Star Wars. There's a lot of it that I enjoy as well. But this is the point that older Star Wars fans are making. These stories, again of varying quality, were important to people, but were swept away to try to attract new fans and construct a more manageable continuity. Were they successful? Well, that's a question for another episode, really. Shifting gears somewhat, I really want to emphasize how important continuity is to Star Wars fans, and this is even conceding several existing retcons and outright contradictions that existed in previous versions of Star Wars Expanded Universe continuity. But Star Wars has always been a transmedia phenomenon, and let me define that. Something that is transmedia is a story that is told across multiple media, and that story is continuous. You have a continuity built across books, comics, films, television series, video games. Anything that you can use to tell the story is an integral part of the entire experience. Now, as an example of how this was done in the old expanded universe, I fondly remember 1996. and a little phenomenon called Shadows of the Empire. I'm sure a lot of people who are Star Wars fans in my age group will also remember that. This was a story that was told across an interconnected novel, 2 comic series, a toy line, and a video game on the Nintendo 64. Characters that were introduced in Shadows of the Empire were mentioned in other stories, and even featured in other stories. They were used by other writers, and they hung around for a long time. Some notable examples being Prince Shizor, the Black Sun crime lord and main villain of Shadows of the Empire, was mentioned several times throughout other books. I remember seeing his name in, for example, the X-Wing series. You also had Dash Rendar, the generic Han Solo replacement that they came up with for the story. Yeah, I guess it's kind of a spoiler alert, but not really. They believe that he died in Shadows of the Empire, but he actually features much later in the books again. He comes back. And you even have some really interesting, unique characters that came out of this. We only see her in a comic series after the Shadows of the Empire novel where she was created, but the story also gives us a character named Guri, who is a droid who looks completely human and functions completely as a human being. And that's entirely unique in Star Wars. I don't recall there ever being another character like this. I mentioned Shadows of the Empire because it was a fairly successful multimedia initiative in the Star Wars universe, and I say that because I've been pretty disappointed with Disney Star Wars multimedia projects so far. With each new movie in the sequel trilogy, there's that whole initiative before it comes out, the road to The Force Awakens or whatever, and they release books and comics that help build that, or are supposed to. But I'm thinking in particular of The Rise of Skywalker when I say this, and I do not mean that reference works like the Visual Dictionary revealing things that maybe should have been in the movie is a big deal. I'm kind of alright with that. My big complaint is that the build-up to the movie had no bearing on it. And let me explain that. There was a prose novel, Resistance Reborn, and a Marvel Comics series called The Rise of Skywalker, Allegiance, something like that were both touted as essential reading leading up to Episode 9. And I read them both. I have to say that I didn't learn much from either one of them that I couldn't have picked up simply from a movie trailer. The novel features a few characters from other stories, yes, I'll concede that, particularly Inferno Squad from Battlefront 2. You have Yendor, the Twi'lek X-Wing pilot from Lost Stars. You have Ransom Casterfo from Bloodline. You have a main character in the novel is Wedge Antilles, even though he has all of half a second in the movie. And I suppose the one useful detail from the book, which is also something that you can surmise from the movie trailer, is the Resistance steals a Corellian Corvette, and they have that in their fleet. That's really all that came from it. I mean, the book doesn't really do much with any of the main characters, except, the heist of the Corellian Corvette, and Black Squadron going and recruiting Wedge, which, is an interesting enough story. It felt like filler, and ultimately, it didn't really pay off that much since so little of it had any bearing on the movie. And the comic basically shows us Admiral Akbar's son, who we see in the movie, and that the Resistance snagged a few Mon Calamari cruisers for their fleet, but they're pretty much absent until the end fight at Exegol in Episode 9. Not really sure why they were shown to have them, since they don't have them in their possession at the beginning of the movie. And, I'm not meaning to complain or nitpick here. And I'm not trying to say that the movies should be beholden to other sources of canon here. I know that the movies are hubs of a lot of money going in and out, and that, directors and actors can't be held accountable for the visions of artists. But, I don't know. I just wish that it all was as sacred as the films, because I've found over the years that I honestly believe the movies are some of the weakest storytelling in the Star Wars universe. And all of this is to say that I wish this expanded material had more weight to it, and that it felt more necessary, and had some bearing on the larger story. I mean, going back a little further to the other movies in this new sequel trilogy, even Phasma got a pretty decent novel despite being a wasted character in the films that featured her. Gwendolyn Christie deserved a lot better than that. And that just seems unbalanced. I just wish that if Disney planned on maintaining novel and comic lines for this property, that they treated them as essential parts of the story instead of largely pointless diversions to make just a little bit more money on the side. Now, those are my primary thoughts for today's episode. Again, I'm not in any way attempting to pick a fight with either new, old, young, inexperienced, experienced, ancient, cosmic fans of the Star Wars franchise. I'm simply stating an opinion and maybe asking questions of those of you who listen to this. How do you feel about Star Wars and the direction that it's taking? And it's not necessarily a new direction that has started with Disney. I know that, during the prequel era, a lot of things from the expanded universe continuity were disregarded or changed. Prior to the prequel films, writers such as Timothy Zahn and others were trying to piece together exactly what the Clone Wars were, and that was a vastly different vision from what ended up becoming canonical in the films. So, it's all a mixed bag, and it's all of varying quality, and there are contradictions and things that are cringeworthy, I suppose you could say, across all of it, but all of these stories were works of love at one time or another, in order to keep a universe that a great many people loved alive. And I would just like to see that level of love and respect be maintained. Other YouTubers have called for Disney to reconsider using some of these writers from the previous expanded universe to help re-expand their new universe. I think that that's a good idea. I mean, you see canonical works by, say, James Luceno, who wrote, among many other books, Darth Plagueis. He wrote a new Tarkin novel that's considered canonical. So they have made some inroads with that, and of course the most notable example is Timothy Zahn and his new Thrawn books. I think that it's great that Disney decided to keep Thrawn around. I do wish they had decided to keep some other characters around as well, but I'm beginning to drift again toward another line that may be better suited to a separate episode. So I will, with a few more points, wrap up this episode. I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe in this age of coronavirus. I hope that you're all maintaining your social distancing, reading good comic books, listening to halfway decent podcasts like mine, and sort of report in down below. Let me know how you're doing if you're listening to this. Let me know how things are where you are. I want to thank you for listening to me thus far. And be sure to check out the new thumbnail images that Candace helped me put together for my past episodes and for this one. They are suited to each episode, I will say. And I'm trying to take a firmer hand on the reins of where I want this to go. So we'll see what shape the podcast takes in the future. Eighthworld Podcast is and always shall be partnered with Misplaced Muse Creative, a wonderful source for bookish gifts, wax goods, and hot beverages. Links to their social media are in the episode description below. Thanks again for listening. Be sure to like and favorite this episode and all the others. Be sure to subscribe as well, and come back and give me a listen. Thanks again. Have a good week.